He didn't bark. He didn't chase cars, he just waited. Every single day for 1,000 days by the same stretch of cracked asphalt just outside a quiet Midwestern town. Locals had come to call him Buddy, though no one knew his real name. Some left scraps of food, others took photos, but most just slowed down, stared for a second, and kept driving. There was something in his eyes, something too human to ignore, too painful to dwell on. They said he'd been dropped off one rainy evening in the fall, right there on the side of Route 15. A rusty old truck, a slammed door, taillights disappearing into dusk. He had chased after them at first, desperate, fast, frantic. But the truck never came back, and after that, he stopped running. He just sat. He was a border collie mix, once well-groomed, now scruffy. His coat had dulled under the sun and storms, but every morning, like clockwork, he'd trot to the same spot along the curve in the road, sit facing east and wait, tail curled neatly beside him, ears alert, eyes locked on the horizon. And he never missed a day. Seasons changed. Summers scorched the roadside grass. Winters painted it in frost and silence. But Buddy remained. The people in town got used to him. Some pitied him, some admired him. Children would wave from school buses. One old man, Walter, brought a blanket during the first snow and said, "No creature should wait alone in the cold." Still, no one ever tried to take him in. He wouldn't have let them anyway. He wasn't lost. He was waiting. That was different. You could see it in the way he ignored affection, the way his eyes darted past everyone as if searching for someone else, as if he were scanning faces, hoping for one in particular. And no one ever came. Day 300, then 600, then 900. The town changed. New pavement, new faces. But Buddy didn't. He had become a fixture, a myth, a story told to visitors and shared online with captions like, "The dog who waits." People speculated, maybe he was abandoned, maybe his owner died, maybe he was just confused. But then came day 1001. The air was different that morning, warmer, full of pollen and life. The breeze carried something on it, something almost electric. Buddy stood, nose twitching. His posture changed. His eyes blinked twice, wide and focused. And then, for the first time in almost 3 years, he moved. Not just shifted, he bolted. Across the road, into the trees, down a path overgrown with weeds and memory. His legs stumbled at first, weakened by stillness, but momentum carried him. His tail was raised high. He ran like he knew exactly where he was going. And maybe he did. He didn't stop to sniff the ground or second-guess his path. His legs knew. His heart knew. There was a rhythm to his steps, urgent, determined, almost haunted, as if the air itself had whispered a command, and he had no choice but to obey. He crossed creeks swollen from spring melt, ducked under branches thick with blossoms, and trotted past old barns and telephone poles rusted by time. Drivers slowed to watch him, a blur of black and white fur streaking across a field, eyes set on something just beyond the visible. A trucker saw him racing across the intersection and slowed, calling out, "Hey there, boy!" But Buddy didn't turn. He didn't bark. He didn't pause. The sound was irrelevant. He was chasing something deeper. By the time he reached the edge of the county, his paws were muddy and cracked, his ribs pressed against his skin. But he didn't care. Hunger, thirst, exhaustion, none of it mattered. What mattered was the scent, faint, fading, but unmistakable. It came and went on the breeze like a memory. Warm laundry, lavender soap, old wooden floors. It wasn't just a smell, it was a feeling, a presence, a whisper from a life he once knew. He reached the gates of the nursing home by late afternoon, the sun a pale blur behind the clouds. Security lights flickered to life. Sam circled the fence once, twice, nose low to the ground. He found a gap near the maintenance shed, barely wide enough, but he squeezed through. Inside, the world felt quiet. Not the kind of silence that comes from absence, but the kind that precedes something important, like the air before a storm, like the hush of a final breath. Sam padded across the grass, head low, ears twitching. Every instinct screamed he was close, so close. And then he heard it, a cough, software raspy, a sound he hadn't heard in 3 years, but could have recognized in 1,000 more. He froze. There it was again. He turned, tail stiff, eyes locked on a figure beyond a large glass door. A woman, frail, sitting in a wheelchair, head tilted slightly toward the breeze that drifted in through a cracked window. The smell hit him like thunder. His muscles moved before he thought. He bolted forward, pawed the door with growing urgency, whined, then howled. Inside, the nurse jumped. The woman, Helen, did not at first. But then, she blinked. Once, twice, then slowly turned her head. Their eyes met. And for the first time in over 1,000 days, Sam wagged his tail. Not wildly, not like a puppy greeting its owner at the door, but slow, hesitant, as if testing the moment, as if unsure whether what he was seeing was real or just a dream conjured by longing. Inside the room, Helen didn't speak. Her head tilted slightly, lips parted. Her hands, thin, papery, gripped the armrests of her chair. A nurse approached, murmuring gently, "Miss Helen? It's just a dog outside, sweetie." But Helen didn't react to the voice. Her eyes were locked on his, and Sam's body trembled, not from fear, not from cold, but from release. 1,000 days of holding in hope, of not knowing if he'd ever see her again. And now, she was here. He barked, once, short, sharp, like a call from the other side of memory. The nurse blinked. Did she just flinch?" Another nurse walked over. "Helen?" she said, bending close. "Honey, are you okay?" And then, Helen did something she hadn't done in months. She lifted her hand. It wasn't smooth. Her fingers shook, her wrist weak, but she raised it and pointed to the door. "To him," she whispered, her voice like old leaves brushing pavement. "He came back." Gas filled the room. One nurse stumbled toward the door, unlocked it, and stepped aside. Sam didn't charge in. He moved slowly, reverently, as if crossing a sacred line. His nails clicked gently against the floor, each step measured. Helen's hand hovered in the air, trembling with expectation. Sam reached her knees and paused. They stared at each other. No one in the room spoke. Time collapsed. It was just them now, two souls suspended in something deeper than memory, older than time. Then Sam took the final step forward and pressed his head into her lap. Helen let out a breath, a sound like relief, like surrender. Her hand sank into his fur and didn't let go. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. "They told me you were gone." Sam didn't move. He just stayed there, body still, tail slowly sweeping side to side, as if to say, "I was never far, just waiting." The words weren't spoken aloud, but they echoed through the room nonetheless, etched into the expressions of everyone present. Even the nurses, hardened by years of routine and loss, felt their throats tighten. Helen's hand moved gently through Sam's fur, tracing old patterns her body somehow remembered. Her other hand, limp for months, twitched against the armrest, then with slow effort, lifted to join the first. "Good boy," she whispered. Her voice cracked like ice melting under spring sun. "You found me." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the shock of reunion, of memory breaking through the fog. Nurses exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. They chose the latter. This wasn't medical. This was something else, something sacred. Sam didn't lift his head. He leaned in closer, curling gently against her legs. He had waited in the cold, in the wind, through seasons and storms, but now in the faint warmth of her presence, he melted. His breathing slowed, his ears relaxed, his eyes half closed. Helen's gaze softened, as if a veil had lifted from her mind. She leaned down as far as her fragile frame allowed, forehead brushing the top of Sam's head, and for a moment, just a moment, she smiled, a real smile. One of the nurses, young and new, began crying quietly by the doorway. "This shouldn't be possible," the head nurse murmured. But it was. And that night, Helen did something else she hadn't done in a year. She ate a full meal, with Sam by her side, lying at her feet like a guardian carved from the memory of love itself. The staff tried to explain it later, to each other, to doctors, to Helen's daughter who called once a month out of guilt. Cognitive re-engagement, someone said. Emotional stimulus, another offered. But no one really knew, because medicine could track the progress of disease, but it couldn't explain what tethered one soul to another across time, across silence, across fire and smoke and asphalt and 1,000 days of waiting. That bond didn't live in science journals. It didn't have a diagnosis code or measurable output. It was the kind of thing people only whispered about late at night, when logic stepped aside and memory took the wheel. The days that followed blurred into each other like watercolors. Sam never left Helen's side, not once. He refused to eat unless her hand was nearby, refused to sleep unless her scent wrapped around him like a blanket. And Helen changed. The nurses saw it first, a sharper glint in her eyes, a clarity not seen since the fire. She started humming songs no one had heard her sing before. She began requesting the blinds be lifted in the mornings so Sam could watch the trees sway. She smiled when he licked her hand after each meal. "She's coming back," one nurse whispered. "No," the older one said. "She was never really gone. He just brought her home." On the fifth morning, Helen woke before the staff. Sam was already alert, sitting at the foot of her bed, eyes fixed on her as if watching over a queen. She reached out, both hands this time, and cupped his face. "You're still my boy," she whispered, "aren't you?" Sam licked the edge of her palm and closed his eyes. And that was when something remarkable happened. She laughed, not a faint, fleeting sound, a full laugh. Deep, bright, like the chime of wind through porch bells. It echoed down the hallway, drawing nurses like a beacon. "She's laughing," someone gasped. "She hasn't laughed in 2 years." Helen was still holding Sam's face. "He's telling me stories," she said softly. "He's been saving them for me." And maybe he had. Maybe every wag of his tail, every blink of his eyes, every silent day spent waiting on the side of that lonely road had gathered stories. Tiny fragments of devotion, of longing, of the space love holds when it has nowhere else to go. And now he was giving them back to her, one memory at a time. Some memories came like whispers, faint, floating just beneath the surface of consciousness. Others burst forward like sunlight through curtains, sudden, warm, undeniable. Helen began to speak more, not full conversations, not all at once, but pieces, names, places, the corners of a life thought lost. She'd mumble about the garden fence her husband built, or the porch swing that creaked every August afternoon. Sometimes she'd say things no one understood, except Sam. He'd lift his ears, tilt his head. He remembered even when no one else did. One afternoon, a staff member brought in an old radio and tuned it to a station that played 1950s classics. When a familiar melody trickled through the speaker, unchained melody, slow and aching, Helen gasped. Sam stood up from his nap, walked over, placed his head gently on her knee. "His song," she whispered. No one asked whose. They didn't need to. It was memory doing its work. But it wasn't all light. There were nights Helen would shake, cry softly, murmur things like, "Fire," and I couldn't find him. Sam would wake instantly, place both paws gently on her lap, and wait, completely still, like an anchor in the storm. And every time without fail, her trembling would ease. Sam didn't need to understand every word. He knew the shape of her sorrow, the pattern of her breathing. He was her memory's compass, guiding her not just backward, but through. Sometimes staff found Helen asleep, with her hands still curled in Sam's fur. And sometimes when she couldn't speak, she'd blink once, slowly, and Sam would respond. A nuzzle, a paw on her foot, a soft whine. They didn't need language. They had presence. And the others started to feel it too. A nurse recovering from grief would linger in their room longer than necessary. An orderly, known for being brisk, began to bring Sam water in a crystal bowl from home. The facility dog, a friendly golden retriever named Marbles, stopped entering Helen's wing entirely, as if understanding it belonged to someone else now. Sam had become more than Helen's dog. He had become her living memory, her protector, her peace. And in the quiet, unspoken hours, when the sun filtered in and the world slowed, Those who passed room 208 began to whisper that something was happening there. Something gentle. Something holy. That's what they started calling it. Not out loud, but in the way they knocked before entering her room now. In the way voices dropped when speaking near her door. As if room 208 had become more than a space, it had become a sanctuary. A space where something unseen lived between breath and memory. And Sam was its keeper. One nurse, Olivia, began lighting lavender oil in the hallway before her shift. For calm, she said, but everyone knew why. The scent reminded Helen of home. She'd close her eyes, take a deep breath, and whisper, "Summer," before the fire, and Sam would rest his head on her lap, as always. On Sundays, a new tradition emerged. Staff would gather around the door during their breaks, some with coffee, some with tears they wouldn't explain. They didn't speak, they just listened. Sometimes to the scratch of Sam's paws adjusting on the floor. Sometimes to the creak of Helen's rocker, but more often to the sound of Helen humming. Not always clearly, not always on key, but fully present. One Sunday she recited a poem. No one knew where it came from. She just looked at Sam, eyes wet with something ancient, and said, "The stars forget, but the dog remembers. The fire fades, but the paw waits. And where the waiting ends, love begins again." No one dared speak after. It wasn't just recovery. It wasn't just love. It was ritual. Memory made sacred. Grief transformed into presence. And yet, it couldn't last forever. Sam was growing older. It showed in the way he struggled to rise in the morning. The way his breathing had grown heavier. His eyes still held their depth, but there was a softness now, a settling. He had found her. He had fulfilled his weight. But the body, even when wrapped in purpose, has limits. Helen felt it too. She began to nap more during the day, sometimes waking confused, whispering, "Don't go, Sam. Don't leave me again." And he never did. Even when it hurt to walk, even when his legs trembled, he stayed, because sacred things don't abandon their altar. And Sam was never just a dog. He was devotion given form. Waiting made flesh. The past, sitting patiently in the present, so that the heart could finally rest. And it did, slowly, gently, like snow falling into a still lake. Helen no longer asked what day it was. She didn't need to. The rhythms of her life had reduced to simpler truths. When Sam stood, she rose. When he slept, she napped. When he ate, she tried. And when he looked at her, she remembered, not with words, not with names, but with breath, with ease. They began taking walks again, just a few steps each day. Down the hall past the faded portrait of the founders, out onto the garden terrace where the breeze carried the scent of roses and old stone. Sam would walk beside her wheelchair, slow but steady, his body failing but his duty intact. Sometimes she'd whisper to him. Sometimes he'd lean his head against her thigh and close his eyes. The staff never interrupted. It was like watching two ghosts learning how to live again. One afternoon, rain tapped gently against the windows. The sky was low, full of memories. Helen sat beside the glass, staring out into the blur. Sam was curled at her feet, eyes closed, his breathing deeper than usual. She reached down slowly and rested her hand on his side. "You remember the barn, don't you?" she said softly. There was no answer, but there didn't need to be. "I thought you were gone when it burned, thought you ran, thought I lost you." Her voice cracked. "But you stayed. You waited. You didn't run at all. I was the one who left." Her hand gripped the edge of the chair. "I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't even call your name." Sam stirred, just enough to let her know. He heard. Helen looked down, her eyes cloudy with age and sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I left you alone." Sam lifted his head, slowly, painfully, and rested it on her foot. And Helen wept. But they were not the tears of guilt. They were release. Because somehow, through the rain and silence and lost time, they had found what so many people never do. A moment not just to return, but to be forgiven. And in that moment, something between them shifted. It wasn't loud or visible. No grand gesture, no cinematic swell of music. Just a quiet surrender in Helen's shoulders. A soft exhale from deep within her chest, as if she'd finally allowed herself to stop carrying the weight of absence. Forgiveness, after all, doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in a shared breath, in the touch of fur warmed by years of waiting. The days grew slower after that. Helen spoke less, but when she did, her voice carried a softness that hadn't been there before. Not weakness, peace, acceptance. And Sam, he began sleeping more, sometimes not even stirring when visitors entered the room. His walks became shorter. His legs would tremble even on the way to the garden, but he'd still go. Every day, because that's where she liked the breeze. That's where she remembered things more clearly. On one of those afternoons, the sun dipped lower than usual. Shadows stretched long across the garden floor. Helen's hand rested on Sam's back, her thumb brushing through his fur in lazy, circular patterns. He was the only thing that didn't leave, she said to no one. A nurse who had been walking by paused, frozen in the doorway. I lost a home, a man, a name, but not him. He waited. Helen turned her head slowly toward the nurse. Do you know what that means? The nurse's eyes welled. I think so, she whispered. Helen nodded and then returned her gaze to Sam. He remembered me better than I remembered myself. That night, Sam didn't get up when the dinner cart passed. He stirred. He blinked, but he didn't rise. Helen noticed. She asked for her tray to be placed on the floor beside her chair. She whispered something the staff didn't catch and nudged the plate gently toward Sam with her foot. He sniffed it, then closed his eyes. No appetite left, just nearness. That was enough. Sam didn't wake up the next morning. He was still there, curled beside her bed, head resting against the wooden leg of the chair she always sat in, as if even in sleep he refused to be far from her. But his chest no longer rose, and when the nurse called his name, there was no flick of his ears, no tail, no sound. Helen opened her eyes slowly. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. She just reached down, placed her hand on the still warm fur behind his shoulders and whispered, I know. Then she closed her eyes again and leaned her head back. She didn't speak for the rest of the day. The staff didn't force her. They didn't tell her what they found, because she already knew. Her silence was not shock. It was sacred. Later that evening, when the sun dipped below the trees and the shadows lengthened like quiet farewells, Helen stirred. She asked to be wheeled to the garden one last time. As the cool breeze touched her cheeks, she smiled faintly and whispered, Don't wait anymore, sweetheart. I'm not lost anymore. That night, she passed quietly in her sleep. Some said it was coincidence. Others called it heartbreak. But those who had seen them together, who had felt the stillness in room 208, who had watched love stretch its arms across years of silence and fire and waiting, knew better. It wasn't death. It was reunion. They buried Sam beneath the oak tree on the edge of the garden. A simple plaque rests there now, just beneath the shade where the light breaks through the leaves. He waited. She remembered. They found each other. And every spring, when the wind shifts just right, the nurses swear they still hear the soft tap of paws in the hall, a breath by the window, a presence that never truly left. Because some stories don't end, some loves don't leave, and some dogs wait, not just to be found, but to bring someone home. If this story touched your heart, share it, and don't forget to subscribe, because some stories are meant to be remembered.